me to introduce myself. This is Sacred Scars, Unbroken Spirit, and this is a collective of stories that reflect my healing journey based off of traumatic events that have happened in my life and how I have overcome. These stories are currently being turned into a book that will be available at a later date. So, without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Also, just a heads up, today's video will be part 1 of 2 for sake of time management and making sure, things don't go too long because it's quite a lot to say. Okay. So I'd like to start off this series with a favorite quote of mine. Now, I'm unsure of the author, so we'll just credit it as unknown. But I feel that it really truly embodies the full essence of my book and this healing journey. And so it goes. You were placed in the middle of the storm, not to drown, but to learn how to swim. So I was born into an extremely dysfunctional family. I was raised in a very toxic home environment that was filled with both verbal and physical abuse by both of my parents. We'll start with a little bit of background of the trauma I've experienced with my mother first, as her explosive anger and volatility has had the most extensive impact on my life over time as I was growing up. Plot twist, my mother is a long-term practicing psychiatrist who also has full-blown narcissistic personality disorder. And that's going to be very relevant. So keep that in mind, as I continue to tell this story. So as such, her narcissistic abuse in my life, it ultimately had a snowball effect, and I spent the majority of my life in fight or flight mode. Obviously with very severe nervous system dysregulation. I can remember being a very highly anxious child. The toxic, controlling environment I was raised in was exactly that. Full of yelling, screaming, verbally abusive in every sense of the word. I was so young, I never really realized what was truly going on. I didn't understand what was happening, and the abuse was both direct and indirect. And when I say that, what I mean by that is my mother would both yell and call me names, both to my face and behind my back via text messages, conversations with my dad, so on and so forth, completely behind my back. And I've seen these text messages firsthand, and let me just say, they're pretty nasty. They're pretty, just very horrible things for a mother to say about her own daughter. And this went on my whole entire life. It's unfortunate to say, but it's even still happening to this day. I can remember living a very sheltered life growing up, full of excessive rules, do's, don'ts, along with the usual do as I say, not as do as I say just because I said so. Now, while I feel this is a pretty common thing in most households, in my household, it was experienced to a much higher degree that also came with equally excessive punishments. I.e. angry emotional outbursts, taking things away, even going as far as kicking me out of the house as a knee-jerk reaction, just to spite me. For instance, On one or more occasions, my mother would impulsively, just in the heat of the moment, she would remove my medication from the fridge and take it to her job out of spite when she'd get mad at me. Now, mind you, this was a very, very, very expensive, very important injection that I direly needed every month to control my severely debilitating chronic daily migraines. This shot ran about $800 out of pocket, so if something were to happen to it, there was no getting another shot. I mean, you were SOL, you know? So it just goes to show how far my mother was willing to go to hurt me, both emotionally or in this case physically. You know, she was willing to destroy my health, just out of spite, you know, in the heat of the moment, purely just, you know, again, knee-jerk reactions. This is how dangerous my mother was starting to become, unfortunately. And little did I know, this was not just the beginning. It's just one example of many, many traumatic wounds I would come to experience, eventually collecting a lifetime of back-to-back traumas, you know, so many wounds that continued to pile on over and over and over, just from living in a home surrounded by so much abusive power, narcissistic, verbal, everything in between. So I'd like to switch gears now and talk a little bit about my later years growing older. At this time period of my life, late 20s, early 30s, this period was much more impactful with regard to my mother and I's relationship. This was the time where it really began to completely spiral downward. I've never experienced unconditional love in my life, and things were no different with my mother. If anything, it was only given to me, you know, love was only given to me, if even any recognition at all. It was only given based off of how well I was performing in school or how well I was doing in athletics. It was all dependent on her level of control and how well I was listening and doing what she said, making her proud. But again, this was all based off of, you know, her control and making me perform. My value was based off of, you know, how much work I could pump out, how high I could score academically, or how well I placed in my running events, in school athletics. If I wasn't the best, I was getting yelled at, to do, you know, pushed to do better. And I was even bribed with money to get better grades at one point. Now, looking back, I understand hindsight is 20/20. I understand looking back now that, you know, she was just trying to provide incentive. Of course, every parent wants the best for their child, you know, but this, you know, it had an opposite effect of what she intended. This did something to me psychologically that it did more damage later on in life, down the road, where I started to pull my worth from outside validation exclusively. You know, for so long, the only value that I saw in myself was, you know, it came from performing and having a perfectionist mentality. It was just based off of, you know, not even that. I was constantly criticizing myself. I was so hard on myself for so long, and they both went hand in hand. The harsh self-criticism and, you know, pushing myself to do more, do better, and thinking I'm not good enough, and I'm only worthy if I can do this or that, and it really messed me up, psychologically. So needless to say, this perfectionist mentality definitely affected me in all aspects of life. I felt the need to prove I was worthy based off of how impressive I was or what I could do. I've since come to learn now in my healing journey that my worth is very much not tied to, what I can pump out or what I can do. I was always enough. I didn't need to do more. I was already perfect just the way I am. I was already whole, I mentioned earlier that I've suffered from chronic daily migraines for over 20 years, and it's known spiritually that all of our diseases are actually physical manifestations of unhealed, like stored trauma, unhealed baggage, that sort of thing, unhealed emotional baggage. In our body, it kind of festers if we don't, heal it or clear it out, and can turn into cancers, and, if it goes long enough without, being addressed. I came to learn that my migraines, my chronic debilitating migraines, all day, every day, were the result of my power being taken from me. And, of course, this stemmed from my mother's control, this narcissistic abuse. My mother would control, for example, what I could wear, and often she would belittle me, and based off of what I chose, or tell me to take it off, or just suppress my creative expression, again taking my power from me. She would continue to leverage control, that said power control, even in the workplace later on in life. She would excessively micromanage me. We ended up working together in the family business, and I was working in her office as under the role of office manager, and working together was not healthy. It was not healthy at all. She would micromanage me and how I did my job. She would nitpick at the way I would choose to complete my work task. She would control what I could or could not say to the patients, to the drug reps, just in general, just suppressing my voice, just again another form of taking my power from me, making me make myself small to appease others, and to protect her reputation, or to just things that she was afraid of, this fear of her reputation, what people would think of her. She would eventually project all of that onto me, but we'll talk more about that later on. But for now, this, essentially, this, I ultimately was just not able to perform my job, correctly, being micromanaged as an office manager, just because of the constant conflicts and disagreements in the office procedures, and how they should be handled. I'll give you a good example. I personally felt there were things that could have been handled much more ethically, or in an ethical way, but a much more ethical way, not only to protect patient privacy at the check-in window during the check-in process, but also to reduce stress on the patient, avoid unnecessary conflict, arguments, etc., etc. It ultimately, because these things ultimately would lead to slowing down the actual check-in process, and you don't want to have that. It makes the patients more anxious at the window. It's just not a good thing, I truly felt like this micromanaging, by my mother, to give one example of the, these things, she wanted us to address patient balances, bills that were owed, whatever, past dues, things the insurance didn't pay, whatever, right then and there as they were checking in for their appointment. And I personally believed that that was just in bad taste and just a bad business practice. Excuse me. But she wanted us to do it right there at the check-in window, every single patient as they checked in. Now I get it. Sometimes patients don't pay their bills or they owe stuff, whatever. But again, I felt that this was totally like just bad business practice. Like, I felt that we should just send them a bill or have them contact the biller, at a later date and discuss it, privately, not in front of the other patients, and not stress them out even more than they already are, but I truly believed, by not doing, that addressing that at the window like she wanted, I believed it would truly avoid a whole myriad of problems, just by, sending the bill, as I said before. But no, everything was her way or the highway, because after all, it was her office and she made the rules. This affected me significantly because I was very empathetic to the patient's financial hardship, which by addressing, money owed at the check-in window, it further exacerbated their anxieties. And amongst other issues, unnecessarily, truly. That's how I felt. And I hated having to follow through. She was adamant. I really, truly hated having to follow through with her orders. And it was things like this that just kind of got the best of my sanity in the end. Unfortunately, the lack of freedom to do my job as I felt, necessary, and through the micromanaging, it ultimately, led me to unfortunately resign from my position as office manager only after 2 years due to her controlling ways and her unwillingness to compromise. It was as if I was dealing with the same levels of narcissistic control, not only at home, but, now the same level of her taking my power from me at work too. And it's like, home life was bad enough, like to deal with the same drama both at home and at the office, like a double whammy, right? And it was too much. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. Honestly. So my mother's narcissistic control and abusive ways continued on, progressively getting worse over the course of about 10 years or so. This was the point where my mother and I's relationship dynamic really spiraled badly downhill, coming to the point, what I would call its culmination point, which we will further explore in the next video, part 2 of this series. So we're going to go ahead and cut it right here. Again, just for time management, I don't want to make this too long. We'll go much more in depth and we'll get into the much more harsher, more traumatic, we'll go way deeper in the next video. But I want to thank you all so much for watching my video and joining me on this journey. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button so that you can continue following my journey, and also hit the notification bell so that you never miss a beat. And I thank you again, and I look forward to seeing y'all in the next one. I'll see y'all in part 2.